George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
And it's live from Rochdale. Get used to it. This is a warm-up for my big match against PiersMorgan, recorded on Tuesday. I promise you, it's going to be the mother of all punch-ups. You will want to see it. It's the 5th televised anniversary of the mother of all talk shows this evening. The show's been going for the best part of 20 years in different iterations, from Talk Sport and across the Atlantic in the Wall Street radio station WBAI, but it came home and on television to you exactly 5 years ago. Well, it's election season in France and in Britain and in the United States, and we'll be covering all of these races, including my own local race here in Rochdale. The Americans have been busy in Crimea and in Dagestan. Terrorist attacks, one from an American missile, ATACMS missile, killed a lot of children on the beach. Sounds familiar. And bearded so-called Islamist fanatics were responsible for multiple murders and mutilations in the Caucasus region of Russia. Amazing. There's been an 8-month genocide going on against the Palestinians, and ISIS and Al-Qaeda haven't even broken an Israeli window, but they're more than ready to go to war for the USA in Dagestan. Well, if you don't know what that all means, I'm afraid you're probably beyond help. And we'll be talking about the situation in Gaza, where 164 people have been murdered in the last 48 hours by Israeli forces, and where many hundreds more were mutilated and could not be treated in the wrecked hospitals in the concentration camp known as the Gaza Strip. So fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night. It is, after all, the 5th anniversary of the televised edition of the mother of all talk shows. Stay tuned.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Well, elections everywhere in the United States, what you might call the big enchilada. The question is, will the two main candidates still be the two main candidates come November? There are ongoing questions about the attempts to imprison the leader of the Republican Party. Imagine, kind of thing that would once get you called a banana republic. The man who's leading in every poll for the presidency may very well be behind bars before November. That will not be a bar to him running as a candidate, but it may well be a disadvantage. Even more strikingly, the current president of the United States is in such a steep cognitive decline, it is a precipitous fall, and only a fool believes that the Democratic Party has any confidence that Joe Biden will turn up for the presidential debates this coming week, and that if he does, he'll be able to stop his trousers falling down. And knowing what we do about what he does in his trousers, that could be a messy affair. Maybe, just maybe, the reason the convention of the Democratic Party is in Chicago is because big Mike Obama is limbering up for her big debut. One of my good friends just texted me minutes before the show to say our poll this evening leaves out the main contender, which is indeed the aforementioned Big Michael. Well, we're asking, will Joe Biden be replaced by Kamala Harris, Hillary Clinton, or Gavin Newsom? Who they will be saying around the world? Well, Americans just might know him as the exceedingly popular government of the great state of California, where we are joined with the audience of KPFK 90.7 FM right across Los Angeles and Southern California. A big hello to you, and no disrespect intended to the state that you've got a Schumer as a governor who might end up as the stooge presidential candidate if Joe Biden literally falls off the stage this week. Kamala Harris, Hillary Clinton, Gavin Newsom. Although if you think Big Mike's got a better shout than any of those, by all means say so in the chat and we'll try and read some of them out. My wife is looking puzzled as to who Big Mike is. Some of you might enlighten her in the chat, but keep it clean, please. Our telephone numbers are +1 844 944 3344. That's toll free if you're in the United States or Canada. In the UK and Ireland, also free of charge, 0808 196 5522. And in the rest of the world, 44 203 966 2625. But the elections in France are looking like a hung parliament. The right-wing National Assembly, the former National Front, led by the Le Pen family, are ahead, but not by much, of my colleague Jean-Luc Mélenchon and his new Popular Front. I think the Le Penists are on about 33. My colleague Mélenchon is on about, and little Macron is toiling down in the teens. So his gamble on an early election following his humiliating defeat in the European Parliament elections just the other week may or may not come off. We're going to have a cohabitation, which is kind of common in France, cohabitation between his party and whomsoever can put together a majority to be Prime Minister in the Assemblée Nationale. But naturally, I am most keen to focus on the British general election, which has come alive, actually, after the entry into the polls as leader of Nigel Farage, who leads the Reform Party, which is a kind of mirror image of Le Pen, Geert Wilders, the Alliance for Deutschland, and so on. Loosely, you can describe it as a British nationalist party. And it's beating many of the same drums. But Farage is a far more attractive character than Le Pen or Wilders or whomsoever it is that leads the AFD. I've never actually been all that clear about that. Farage, if you were asked to be stuck in a lift with political leaders, especially if there was alcohol involved and on board, Farage would probably be your man, although he would immediately light up a cigarette and the lift would quickly become unlivable. But he's that sort of guy. He laughs, he makes you laugh. He is the kind of populist right-wing leader that many other countries wish that they had. In fact, Donald Trump is his bosom buddy, and he's done a fair bit in support of Donald Trump over these last few years. And there was talk that he'd be moving to the US, but he re-entered the British election and he has set it alight. My prediction is that the Reform Party will poll about 25% of the votes cast in the British general election. Could be more, but 25% is the lowest that they will poll. The problem with our electoral system, and my own party, the Workers' Party of Britain, suffers the same. We're not on the same level of popularity of Farage. It's easier to sell prejudice, right-wing prejudice, than it is to sell socialism, of course. But 25% could actually gain Farage 0 members of Parliament. And ditto our, I think, roughly 5% of national support could gain us 0. But the latest polls are showing me comfortably holding my seat with a big majority over the second and third places, which are about to change order. Labour is currently on 21 and Reform is on 20 in my constituency of Rochdale. I'm in the low 30s. So I'm expecting Reform in the next poll to move ahead of Labour. And therefore I can say that in the Rochdale constituency, it's me or Nigel Farage. And so anyone who doesn't want Nigel Farage, and I can think of quite a few of my constituents who'd have some worry, anxiety, if Farage were to take the parliamentary seat in this town, should really get behind me. Don't waste your vote on any of the minor parties, Labour, Liberal, etc. Get behind me. It's a two-horse race in Rochdale between me and Nigel Farage. Now, you may well ask, it's easy to win a by-election, or easier to win a by-election. How do you hold a general election? And it's undoubtedly more difficult. But the other parties have made it easy for me. We had a grooming scandal in Rochdale, which began by a very fat man who was the Liberal mayor of Rochdale and later became the Liberal Member of Parliament for Rochdale, and was given a knighthood even though he was routinely sexually abusing children. Children in homes, children that had no parents, children that had been taken into care, as it was laughingly described. Well, the care involved the sexual abuse, sodomy, and the lash at the hands of the Liberal Democrat mayor and later Member of Parliament. And that grooming scandal continued, and many communities got involved in it. But the one constant in the whole thing was that Labour covered up the grooming scandal in Rochdale, and everybody in the town knows it. They covered it up for their own narrow sectional party interests. Quite apart from all their other failures, just up the road from me are 7 beautiful blocks of flats known as the Seven Sisters, largely empty because Labour gave the property to the worst housing association in England, Rochdale Borough-wide Housing, which has allowed them to tumble and crumble into disrepair and has no idea whatsoever what to do with them. All the while, homeless people in Rochdale are being housed, only for a few days, I must say, but are being housed in the Hilton Hotel at taxpayers' expense, when there are hundreds of vacant flats 500 yards away in the Seven Sisters Tower blocks, which are not being allowed to be inhabited while they decide whether or not to knock them down. They are beautiful, iconic buildings. I commend them to you. They are architecturally a great work of art. I'm working, fighting hard to save them. It's one of my great election pledges. And of course, in 54 parliamentary sitting days, I delivered more for Rochdale than the last 4 MPs over the last 15 years. The last baby born in Rochdale was 2011. The next will be born next year in 2025. Thanks to a concession wrung by me from the health minister of the outgoing Tory government. And she made the point that we could have had it earlier. It was blocked in Labour's Manchester, not in Tory Whitehall. But that being as it may, the Labour Party cannot possibly agree to give me the credit for getting the maternity ward back. So they say, no, we're not going to have a maternity. It's going to be a birthing centre. They don't like maternity, Labour, because they can't decide what a woman is. They can't acknowledge that only women can give birth. So they don't like to call it maternity. There'll be no breastfeeding in a Labour birthing centre. It'll be chest feeding. And it'll be people who give birth and not women who are giving birth. Well, the reason they say we can't have a full maternity ward is because we don't have an A&E, an accident and emergency. Imagine a town with no maternity and no A&E. So I've got a simple solution to that. We are going to get an A&E to go along with our brand new maternity unit. I spoke to a woman today. Her brother died of a heart attack outside the empty A&E ward in Rochdale Infirmary. Just imagine that. Imagine the pain of his and his family's demise when they were outside and A&E that Labour closed. So it's actually easier than you think in this general election campaign for me to win. Let me move to bigger international issues. The Americans have been exceedingly busy today. First of all, they programmed an ATACMS missile, fired no doubt by Ukrainian service personnel. I say no doubt, there may be a doubt, but let's give them the benefit of that doubt and say that a Ukrainian finger was on the trigger, but the missile's trajectory can only be programmed by United States experts who gave them the weapons. This ATACMS missile landed and was intended to land amidst beachgoers in Crimea, in Sebastopol, very famous place in the Crimean War. There's a new Crimean War now about to break out because the Russians will not allow this terrorist attack, which killed several children and maimed and mutilated many more on that beach. There you can see behind me the actual video of the missile's arrival, an American missile's arrival on a beach in Crimea. Even more dastardly in terms of quantum was the terrorist attack mounted in Dagestan today. Still going on, actually. A group of bearded, so-called ISIS fighters were running amok in Dagestan. They killed at least 6 policemen. They wounded many more policemen, and now they are randomly shooting in the streets and killing civilians. 2 of them have been killed, 3 of them have been apprehended, but others are still at large. Now, some of you don't like to hear what you think is a conspiracy theory, but I'm going to tell you that ISIS and Al-Qaeda only ever attack people that the United States and its allies are already attacking, have already made official enemies of the Western Empire. See if I'm wrong. See if I am wrong. For 8 months, 150,000 Palestinian refugees in a concentration camp in Gaza have been mercilessly murdered and maimed. And not an Israeli window has been broken by ISIS or Al-Qaeda. What do you think that is? Who do you think ISIS and Al-Qaeda are really working for? Who brought ISIS and Al-Qaeda into being in the first place? I think if you're a regular viewer over the last 5 years, regular listener over the last 19 years, you already know my view on that. But the fact that Russia, again, is the subject of the terrorist attacks of ISIS, in this case still ongoing, and indeed other twin attacks taking place in other provinces of Russia nearby, details of which are still coming in. There's a full-scale attack on Russia by the Western allied ISIS organization. That's right. These terrorists in Dagestan today didn't just murder Russian policemen. They set on fire the local synagogue and they slit the throat of the local Russian Orthodox priest. It is stunningly obvious to me, and I would have hoped to you, that these people are working for the Western Empire. Sorry for the loss of picture there. Only time for one. It is Nigel Farage, that I mentioned earlier, was subject to a full-scale, full-spectrum political attack from all of the other parties, except mine, from all of the media, except this, for stating the bleeding obvious that the war in Ukraine was created by Western provocation, that the West provoked what happened in Ukraine as far back as 2014, when they overthrew in a violent coup the elected government that was governing there. They made no bones or any secret of the fact that they were intent upon, and they achieved, the overthrow of the elected government, whose first act was to outlaw the Russian language, spoken by fully 33%, 1/3 of the entire population of Ukraine, including its president, Volodymyr Zelensky, now chief martial law administrator in the election-free zone in Kiev. The fact that this coordinated attack on Farage, on an issue that every other serious person in the world, including the Norwegian tailor Stoltenberg, erstwhile leader of NATO, who openly stated that Russia moved to stop Ukraine joining NATO, which is exactly what Farage said. The fact that any serious commentator knows that what Farage said is true, and yet he was subjected to this withering crossfire from everywhere, every part of the orchestra of the prevailing orthodoxy, shows not their strength, but their weakness. You see, Western narratives on Ukraine and on many other things are Potemkin villages. They are paper thin. All they require is someone with an audience to say the emperor has no clothes, and everyone starts to look at the naked man. It's all coming up in the next 1 hour and 40 minutes. Stay tuned to the mother of all talk shows.
I must start by congratulating you. It's great to be talking to George Galloway, MP, again.
Congratulations on your resounding victory. I think that I could speak on behalf of the world when I say we are thrilled to have you back in office.
Hi Bella, congratulations to your win. I would like to say that you were voted by the people, all the people that wanted you there. The other person, Starmer, Rishi Sunak, they weren't elected by the people. And I think you should broaden the horizon. I think I want to work for you in Birmingham and actually help your voice coming out of what's happening in Palestine.
Congratulations on such a huge victory. As I said on Twitter, it's a rare glint of hope in the midst of Gaza's dark night.
And I want to congratulate you on your momentous victory in Rochdale. You really put the fear of God into the political elite in this country, and that is something we can all be thankful for.
I want to congratulate you on your win. I think it's not just a win for you, George, but I think it's a win for Palestine in so many ways.
Thank you for everything that you're doing in the UK, because as a young communist in America, it's very inspiring to see your victory and everything that the Workers' Party of Great Britain is doing. I'm just so happy, and I will fully endorse George Galloway for Prime Minister and get rid of the Zionist in office who's currently occupying it.
You've been saying this for the longest time, and nobody seems to listen to you. I mean, those who don't seem to get what you've been standing for, when you said, yeah, this is about Palestine and the UK. Free Palestine means a free UK. They don't listen.
And Rochdale's are very lucky. I wish you have a candidate in Coventry.
Thank you very much.
You know, you've given a lot of people a lot of hope and a big boost and an understanding that it is possible to beat the system, that no matter how powerful the political class may be, no matter how much they've got the mainstream media in particular under their thumb, the broadcast media, no matter how much they seek to control the narrative, given a chance, the people will reject them.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Now, you're used to telephoning questions into me on my various shows, I've spoken with thousands of you over the last couple of decades. But now, on my new show, you get a chance to appear in person on a video wall. It would be good to see what you looked like as well as what you sounded like. It's very simple to get on my show. Go to www.haveitoutwithgalloway.com. Just register there. We'll get you on the television with me. Come and have a go if you think you're hard enough.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
So here's the poll. Will Joe Biden be replaced by Kamala Harris, Hillary Clinton, or Gavin Newsom? Or you can even suggest others, if you please. 22,308 people have voted already, and I'm just announcing it. You can vote on my Telegram, t.me/George Galloway, on my X, my Twitter, on the YouTube community poll, or on the YouTube stream. If you're watching us on the YouTube stream, please, A, subscribe to my channel, B, share it with everybody else that you can. Ditto on other platforms that allow you to do that. Twitter, Rumble, Instagram, everywhere. We are on all platforms, remember. Phone numbers, again, if you're in the US or Canada, it is toll-free, +1 844 944 3344. It's exactly free of charge in the United Kingdom and Ireland, 0808 196 5522, and in the rest of the world, 44203 966 2625. And again, a big welcome to all those listening to the show on KPFK 90.7 FM across Los Angeles and Southern California. One of my favorite guests on the Mother of All Talk shows is an American in Moscow, the first class. He's a bloodhound for the real truth, the real story. And he's found plenty of blood in the Donbass and elsewhere, where the Ukrainian regime, armed with NATO weapons, have been taking their toll on human life all the time he's been there and longer than that. But guess where Donald was over the last few days? Let me show you before I introduce him. This is Donald Courter abroad.
So the event on Kim Il-sung Square has come to an end, and we're driving to a different location now, and so many people throughout the streets. We've been saying hi to them this whole time. Have been, crowds of people down the road for kilometers and kilometers here to welcome the Russian delegation and Vladimir Putin here. I mean, my arm's even getting tired of waiting so much. This grandiose warm welcome on Kim Il-sung Square in the center of Pyongyang has just come to an end, that the people of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea have organized for this visit of Russian President Vladimir Putin. As you can see, there's thousands of them on the square, around 50,000, all happy to warmly welcome the Russian president here in Pyongyang for this historic event.
Donald Courter, what an extraordinary event to have been a part of. First visit by President Putin to Pyongyang. I've been in Pyongyang a couple of times, actually, so I already knew it was interesting, but I must say it's looking a bit more plush than the last time I was there 20 years ago. Tell us, Donald, how was it for you in Pyongyang with Putin?
Yeah, well, George, I have to say I was
Absolutely, really impressed. I mean, I obviously know that most of the stuff the West says about North Korea is just kind of propaganda, but I didn't expect, to be honest, the sort of modernity of the city. I mean, a lot of new buildings have sprung up as of recently. Our guides were telling us about it as well, and this was part of something that I read about. KimJongUn had already, actually probably around 10 years ago, started a sort of modern apartment complex construction project in mass in Pyongyang. And we saw the results of that, free housing to the people of Pyongyang, absolutely new. I remember we were passing by some of the apartment buildings, and we asked our minders if they were new or not. He said, no, they were old. They're 7 years old. For me, that's new. But I mean, it was really a fantastic experience. I mean, like I put on my Twitter account, I mean, some of these apartment buildings in Pyongyang would make many people in the West that are trying to, struggling to pay their rent themselves would really be envious of. I mean, I know I would if I was still living in the West. But, it was just in terms of the welcoming that the Korean people gave us, it was just absolutely astounding. They had put so much effort into putting together this welcoming ceremony for Vladimir Putin and the Russian delegation. They're really happy to know that relations between their two countries were really getting warmer and warmer. They welcomed us really well. We had no restrictions on what we could film. That was another thing. We filmed whatever we wanted. We even were able to talk to some people at the event. We caught some short words about with people that could speak English about how excited they were. We spoke to some of the guides about the preparations and everything. They prepared 3 months to put this welcoming ceremony together. And they said that, it's been very, very, very long since they've put together such a welcoming for a foreign leader. I mean, in terms of what I know about North Korea, the kind of welcome that we saw of a foreign dignitary last time I can think of was maybe in the 70s for Nicolae Ceausescu. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's what I remember as the last one where there was such a huge organized welcoming for a foreign dignitary. So that was really cool.
No, you remember, right. That's exactly the last time that such an event occurred. Sadly, I'm so old, I remember it very vividly indeed. Now, of course, the fools opined that Putin was there with his cap in hand for ammunition and missiles and so on. This is the same set of fools that told us in week 1 or week 3 of the Ukraine war that Russia was running out of missiles and ammunition and stealing washing machines to vulcanize their parts and so on. But in fact, it was a shift in the geostrategic coordinates in the world, wasn't it? It was Putin saying that any attack on North Korea will be regarded as an attack on us. And if America is putting long-range missiles in countries that are hostile to us on our borders, we're going to put long-range missiles in the hands of the people that the United States has deliberately chosen to make enemies of. That was what was really going on, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin, they signed what they're calling a comprehensive agreement on strategic partnership. But if you read the actual details of the document, what it really looks like, is an alliance, because there's a real... one of the main clauses is, like you said, basically a mutual defense pact, where if anyone attacks North Korea, Russia's going to come to their aid. And as well, it goes reverse as well. Obviously, Russia's in the Ukraine conflict already. So theoretically, this could even mean that North Korean troops would be, formally justified to enter into the Ukraine conflict. But I got to tell you, I was lucky enough to be at a press conference with Vladimir Putin at the second stop of his trip in Vietnam, where he addressed this possibility of North Korean troops being in Ukraine. The Russian president said that's not likely to happen because they've already had the opportunity, they were welcome to volunteer or do that already, and they've chosen not to. And Russian president said also they don't really, the Russian forces there don't need any sort of other forces to join there to accomplish the objectives of the military operation. But the North Koreans are, of course, welcome. Like you said, George, the main thing, and Vladimir Putin also said this at the press conference he gave with KimJongUn, or the statement rather he gave after the signing of this agreement, is that this is in connection with the West supplying Ukraine with long-range weapons that they're using and allowing them to use deep within Russian territory. This is something we heard the former president of Russia, after the West started publicly approving of this use of long-range weaponry, the former Russian president, Dmitry Medvedev, said, we're going to start arming and aligning with anyone who's anti-American now as a response to this. And this is, I would say, part of that, an extension of that stance, that policy, where, North Korea and Russia are in the same boat. They're both fighting for multipolarity. They're both anti-imperialist, and they're both some of the most sanctioned countries in the world, Russia being the number one, North Korea now being either number 2 or number 3, I'm not really sure. So they're really in the same boat, and this agreement describes how they have to stick together in the new geopolitical climate.
Well, of course, it's quite an achievement of statecraft, the very reverse of the Nixon-Kissinger statecraft, which was to keep China and Russia as far apart as possible. Current American statecraft has pushed China and Russia together to the point of inseparability, and now what we might call the Medvedev doctrine, which can explain the presence of China in Nicaragua, the presence of China and Russia in Venezuela, the presence of Russian nuclear submarines off the coast of Cuba and therefore off the coast of Miami. It's kind of a big boomerang, this American policy, isn't it?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, because, I've long said that that the United States and the West in general under Washington's leadership has essentially become its own gravedigger, really. I mean, the whole situation it's set up with sanctions, with its stoking the flames of the Ukraine conflict, all it's done has united previously more loosely connected countries that are all fighting against Western imperialism. It's forced them to unite under the flag of multipolarity, essentially. And also it's caused, specifically sanctions have caused Russia's economy not to be damaged. It hasn't destroyed Russia's economy. Russia's economy is growing more than Western so-called experts had projected for the longest time. It's actually flourishing. It's in danger of overheating because it's moving forward so quickly. And all that's happened is that the economy has become more independent, actually, from Western companies. Because when all these Western companies left Russia, all they did was allow Russian companies that were there to substitute them. They just moved into the market where there was a vacuum left from the Western companies. So actually, when this is all over, and it's going to be over at some point, I mean, unless there's going to be the unthinkable situation of nuclear war, this is all going to calm down, and eventually, Western companies, there's going to be some sort of detente. Western companies might want to come back to Russia, and they're going to have huge competition with these Russian companies that had already filled their market share. So really, like I said, I mean, this is really the West being its own gravedigger. And like what we saw in this agreement that the DPRK and Russia signed, right? If the West had not allowed Ukraine or even sent Ukraine long-range missiles and allowed Ukraine to strike targets within Russia, like this horrible attack that we saw today take place in Crimea, then we wouldn't see, we probably wouldn't see Russia and the DPRK making agreements like this. I mean, they wouldn't need to.
Quite so. And I've spoken in my monologue about the attack on Crimea. I'd like your take on the terrorist attack in Dagestan, which, by the way, is still continuing. 40 Christians have been taken hostage inside a Russian Orthodox church. The synagogue is in flames. At least one priest has had his throat slit and murdered and left lying in his church, in the pulpit. This is a serious, second one in a few months, serious assault by people who very obviously are doing the United States bidding, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's also another horrific attack. I mean, today has been really bad in terms of both of these attacks happening so close together. I mean, the multitude of attacks that have happened in Dagestan and the Crimea strike that killed civilians. But I mean, I would say that it would come as no surprise that this is somehow connected to the West. I mean, if we look back at the Crocus City Hall massacre, I mean, that was, according to Russian intelligence and the Russian investigation that was committed, that was Ukraine and the West in general using basically ISIS proxies to carry out a terrorist attack. And this is something that's nothing new, really. I mean, for the longest time in Syria, the United States and ISIS were connected in operations there. We all know that. And so this is likely to be a similar situation in which Muslim fundamentalist or Islamist rather forces are used as proxies, probably by Kiev or somehow connected to Western intelligence services. But it's just another example of how the Ukrainian military, the Ukrainian state, and the West in general are just getting so desperate that they have to commit horrible attacks, terrorist attacks, and kill civilians. I mean, it's like the same thing with the murder of Daria Dugina, the attempt on Prilepin, killing journalists that are not combatants, right? I mean, they have a whole list, Mirotvorets, which I'm on, by the way, and I'm sure you are on too, George. I'm not sure, but I wouldn't be surprised.
We're both on it, Donald. It's one of many things that connects us.
Yeah, I mean that's a list of people that.
How will Russia respond to this, Donald? How will Russia respond? Will they respond only against Ukraine, or against for example, the ATACMS that hit the beach in Crimea today were programmed by Americans? That's the only way that they can be fired. Will they respond by hitting the people who make these terrorist attacks possible, or will they respond horizontally? I mean, I'm thinking in Syria, for example. It would be perfectly legitimate for the Russian forces in Syria that are legitimately present as guests of the legitimate government of Syria. Would it be possible that that Russia will start to be tougher with Israeli attacks on Syria, for example, which continue more or less weekly?
Well, obviously, we're going to have to wait. I mean, these attacks in Dagestan are really fresh. We don't know what kind of statements are going to come out by the Russian government. But the way I would like to see the reaction, the kind of reaction I'd like to see is open support really for organizations like Hezbollah or Palestinian liberation movements that are trying to fight against the genocide that Israel's committing with the backing of the United States. I mean, if we're talking about Russian policy of supporting any groupings in the world that are fighting against Western imperialism, then, I mean, after North Korea, the next logical step would be to support these organizations that are fighting against Israel and their illegal occupation and their genocide. That, I think, would be the best thing the best way for Russia to respond to this. But I think Russia's still trying to take a more diplomatic approach to the situation, although it's becoming less and less possible for Russia to do that because Israel really itself is alienating Russia from having any sort of possible diplomatic connection to them. And also, Ukraine and Israel are getting closer and closer as time goes on. It's becoming, the divisions in these conflicts are becoming clearer and clearer, but from the beginning, it's been West versus the multipolar world, right? So that's how I see it.
Well, I tell you, Donald, do mention it to anyone that you bump into with influence in Moscow. There would be no more popular Russian move that they could possibly make than to step up their support for the Palestinian people under bombardment, for the Lebanese people preparing tonight for a possible ground invasion by America's #1 ally in the world, State of Israel, by the Yemeni people who are continuing to be bombarded by Western airplanes, for applying their own economic sanctions against people sailing supplies to a genocidal occupying country like Israel through their waterways. Do pass it on, please.
Yeah,
because I know you have.
I will. I'm right there with you.
The important in the Kremlin. Thank you, Donald Courter, as always, award-winning journalist, host of The Revolution Report, and ace documentary maker. Now, as I said earlier in the show, we're celebrating tonight. 5 years ago this week, the mother of all talk shows was launched in its current format. What a half-decade it has been. Here's a look at how it all began. Welcome to the mother of all talk shows with me, George Galloway, coming to you from London, but reaching you all over the world. Talk about the law of unintended consequences. It is the Open University of the airwaves. It is the College of Knowledge, and there's still no tuition fees. It's something I have learned in now a couple of decades nearly, working in the media, that a radio show and a TV show are two importantly different things. So I hope the show will be starting on Sunday, the 15th of June at 7 p.m.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
It is the mother of all talk shows. It's our 100th edition. We've got a birthday cake. 100 editions. I'm not eating this, but it says MOATS 100. It's been marvelous. Because we've got a legend on the line. No show is complete. It's Norma in Bristol. It's been marvelous for me. I hope it was for you. And if it was, come back next week at the same time, same place. It's been marvelous. I hope it was for you.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Well, a number of things emerged from that little package, including the fact that that was me when I was older. This is me now. I noticed that I'm still wearing some of the same clothes. I'm noticing that we used to have in-studio guests and then came COVID. But above all, I'm noticing how advanced our production values have now become. They'll be at least as good as the big match between me and PiersMorgan next week. It's being recorded on Tuesday. I don't know when his show will go out, but look out for his midweek show, Piers, what's it called? Uncensored or something like that. Me and Piers have got history, and it's going to be played out on the screen. I promise you, you don't want to miss it. Will Joe Biden be replaced by Kamala Harris, Hillary Clinton, Gavin Newsom? Get voting now, whilst I take the first call of the evening from Southeast London. Victor is on the line. Welcome, Victor. What would you like to say?
Good evening, George. I'd like to discuss the problems that we face on the left. I know you feel so alienated by the left, I find it hard to call yourself part of it anymore. But progressive politics has been eroded by the Blairite hard right all this century, and their tactics are very interesting. They have never once used man-to-man debate. I think that Tony Blair would rather cover himself in lighter fuel and set light to himself than have a debate with you. The same happened with Jeremy Corbyn. They never had a debate with him. What these Blairite termites do is they infiltrate the left. Termites do burrow in and infiltrate with their own self-styled anti-Nazi war heroes, and they resort to personal abuse. They pose as left-wingers, and then they go around saying George Galloway's a Nazi, he agreed with Farage on something, Mr. Corbyn's an anti-Semitic Nazi, he criticised Israel over killing Palestinian babies, and they have these anti-Nazi war heroes who run around trying to bring us all down. They've attacked me, and they've attacked Peter Gregson, a great colleague and hero of yours. So much so that they managed to get him barred from all the Palestinian main organisations that support Palestine. Indeed, I notice you never seem to get on the platforms of the main Palestinian organisations much. The regrettable thing is...
Well, you're right, Victor. Victor, I cut you short only because whilst this is extremely interesting to you and me, and I promise you that, it is interesting to you and me, it genuinely is not of interest to the mass of the public who have nothing but contempt for the people who call themselves the left. I'm not anything to do with the people who call themselves the left. We in the Workers' Party are different from them. They are Trotskyites and liberals, or liberals that used to be Trotskyites. They are people who exalt individualism and are easy prey for any big thing that is fed to them from the mainstream media and from the state. And we are not. We recognized immediately, as to be fair to him, Nigel Farage did, that the war in Ukraine was being provoked and has been since 2014 and is the result of a direct breach of a promise given by James Baker, President Bush the First's Secretary of State, directly, face-to-face, man-to-man, to Mr. Gorbachev, that if he withdrew the Red Army from the eastern part of Germany, that NATO would not expand 1 inch to the east. And they never stopped expanding. Not 1 inch, but thousands of kilometers, to the extent that they now have military bases ringed around Russia. And President Putin told the world in 2008 at his speech in Munich that this was a red line for Russia, that Ukraine had been used twice before by Napoleon and by Hitler as the runway to invade Russia, and he would not allow it. He had a mandate to and a duty to 136 million Russians to look after their interests, and he was going to do so. So we saw that, you saw that, but the liberals didn't see it, the Trotskyites wouldn't see it, and they are overwhelmingly what constitutes the left now. I have not spoken on a Palestinian campaign platform for more than 10 years. Even though I've been 50 years in the field, even though most people would concede that there is no better speaker for Palestine than me in the entire country, even though most people would concede that there's virtually nobody who knows more about Palestine than me in Britain over the last 50 years, even though they'd have to concede that nobody draws a crowd like me other than Jeremy Corbyn himself, 10 years I have not been on one of their platforms. Ditto the Stop the War Coalition. 10 years I haven't been on a Stop the War Coalition platform. And you know what? I wouldn't set foot on their platforms now if they brought me in tribute all the tea in China. Why should I? Because I'm speaking right now to more people that ever attend any demonstration in this country at any time in its entire history. How's that for revenge? Look, a podcast reminder. The MOATS podcast is charting in over 100 countries and has just been #1 in Thailand this week for politics on Apple Podcasts. You can download the MOATS podcast now by scanning the QR code on your screen. Will Joe Biden be replaced by Kamala Harris, Hillary Clinton, Gavin Newsom? You can have your say on Telegram, on Twitter, on the YouTube community poll, or on the YouTube stream. We have got the mother of all guests, Professor Seyed Mohammed Marandi from the University of Tehran, coming up in the second half of the show, because the possibility that we'll all be at war tomorrow has exponentially increased. An Israeli invasion of Lebanon is predicted by most experts and by all Israeli politicians. They could be bluffing, but the way that the American naval assets are steaming towards the Lebanese coast seems to suggest that the balloon is about to go up. And Professor Marandi is just about the best person in the world to speak to about that. But before then, let me talk to Ajil in London about the BRICS. Go ahead, Ajil.
Oh, hi there, George. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak to me. I just had a...
Welcome.
Ask you and your thoughts on it. Firstly, when it comes to the manifestos of different parties and politicians, I've noticed, I'm 35 years old, and I've noticed that the younger generation, even the generation of my age, a lot of people don't really understand how politics work and how the left, the right, the middle, everyone's kind of point of view. Everyone has a manifesto, but there's no clear-cut conversation that has happened openly. Now, I agree with your policies on everything with Israel, with Ukraine, and furthermore, the BRICS nations. My question to you is that we know that there's a massive decline in the West, especially the fact that we're looking at the petrodollar and there is a massive crash that's going to happen, and we're part of it. We can see that the West is currently all together trying to support and push up the petrodollar, which is on the way down. You know, there is going to be an inevitable crash, and the BRICS nation is going to take over. What I don't understand is why have we not, as politicians, talked about it and moved over and started discussing the future of finance, which effectively takes us away from the destruction that we're going through with these wars and with these genocides happening.
Well, I'll tell you what, Ajil, I cut you short only because of the hour, and I have to be more careful of timings now that we are joined by our colleagues in California, in Los Angeles, and so on. You're absolutely correct. I would now be doing that if there was not a genocide going on in Gaza. As the character, the Steve Van Zandt character in The Sopranos said, I keep trying to get out, but they keep pulling me back in. I was not intending to spend the last 8 months in the run-up to a general election talking about Gaza. I wanted to talk about the issues that you have just raised, about the fact that the West is in a political, economic, and cultural decline. Everywhere in the West are in decline. Our degenerate culture, our degenerate and broken political system, where members of the Prime Minister's inner circle are betting on the results of an election when they know, on the date of an election, when they already know the date because they were in the room when the Prime Minister decided it. How's that for petty theft, petty corruption? The degeneracy where you can get hundreds of thousands of votes and might get no seats at all, and yet the Starmerites might get a landslide majority with less than 40% of the vote. Way less than half the people, way more than half the seats. The degeneracy of our economy goes without speaking, without saying. And I would have loved to have spent every single show that we have had over the last 8 months talking about that. But alas, we've been robbed of that possibility. However, our party election broadcast, which went out on the BBC, ITV, Channel 4, Sky News, and seems to have been on every other platform other than my own, well, now it's on the mother of all talk shows. Enjoy. Betrayal, abandonment, disappointment. These are the prevailing emotions amongst voters in this general election. Betrayal of the working people, their living standards, where they live, where they work, or where they used to work. Take Gaza, for example. Millions of Labour voters, the great majority of Labour voters, have been horrified at the show they've been watching on their telephones, on their tablets, on their screens. Their children are even watching. Other children having their heads blown off. Other women having their limbs torn off. Other men scrambling in the rubble, trying to find at least the bodies of their loved ones. And they've looked on in horror as both British political parties supported Israel from the beginning of this genocide right up until this day. They know that these politicians are not reflecting what the public want to see. The public demand a ceasefire, but the political leaders press on regardless. In fact, Keir Starmer whipped his own MPs not to vote for it and sacked those MPs that disobeyed him. Well, the majority of people are asking, what's the point of voting for these two cheeks of the same backside if they stand for exactly the same thing? And most people want to give these two cheeks a good hard kicking. Look at the rights of working people, how they've disappeared in this country over the last 40, 50 years. Once upon a time, this country was built by and for the working class. Now it's for the bankers in the city of London, those who think work is fooling around on a computer screen, who think Swarthega is a Balearic island. This once great industrial power of Britain is what we have to strive to bring back, with respect for the working people who built our wealth as a country in the first place. Look at the situation in the National Health Service. We've got millions of people waiting for urgently needed medical treatment, and somebody's got to pull Britain out of this death spiral. And it won't be either of the miniatures that are running for Prime Minister today. This was once a great Britain. It has to be made great again. The Workers' Party are on a barnstorming tour, the length and breadth of this country, to offer vision, hope, and to offer a little splash of colour to a dull, grey political scene. You know me, you know that I say what I mean, and I mean what I say. Give us a try, you'll see a real difference. Workers' Party, General Election 2024.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Well, I hope that you enjoyed that. You can see it again on Wednesday if you missed it tonight. Now, Professor Seyed Mohammed Marandi, the Chair of American Studies at the University of Tehran, has emerged over the last few years as a seer, as a political analyst, and even forecaster of almost unparalleled brilliance. And I'm glad to say that some of his first gigs and some of his best gigs have been with me on the mother of all talk shows. Professor, it always seems to be the case that we are together across the seas at times of the gravest importance and danger, moreover. It strikes me that we are at another of those inflection points now. The fact that the Israeli forces have completely failed to destroy the resistance inside Gaza does not seem to have dissuaded them from the possibility of having a war with vastly bigger, vastly more heavily armed, and vastly militarily superior forces in Lebanon. That's the meaning to me of the American battle fleet steaming towards the Lebanese coast right now. How does that look to you?
Thank you very much for your very kind words. I think it's true about almost everything that the Americans and the Europeans are doing nowadays. They are pursuing escalation in Europe. Simultaneously, they're pursuing escalation with China. And now we have the genocide in Gaza and escalation potentially with Lebanon. So this irrational behavior that is increasingly dangerous, not just for one region or another, but the entire planet, this is something that we should all be deeply concerned about. This irrational behavior, I think, is leading the West towards a gigantic collapse. They've overextended themselves on all fronts. They're losing in Ukraine. We now see that they're beginning to admit the truth about Ukraine. If we go back and remember what they were saying about the Ukrainian counterattack and how they were going to beat back the Russians, and that's all disappeared. And what we all knew back then is gradually coming out of the Western media, that things are very dark indeed for the people of Ukraine. And then, of course, with China, we see them constantly provoking China over Taiwan, an island right alongside the mainland where people speak the Chinese language. But they insist on poking China. And then now we see this genocide. So I think for all of your viewers, it's clear as day that they've overextended themselves, that they've destroyed their credibility, that they've destroyed their image. But irrational empires that are on the decline, that seems to be what they do. They, the more desperate they become, the more dangerous they become.
They have begun, of course, it's on multiple levels, but part of the political, psychological war operation is to try and divide the people of Lebanon from the Lebanese resistance. Macron said he would arm the forces of the Farage, the Kataib, Gemayel and co., that he would arm the Lebanese army if they would go south and fight the Lebanese resistance. We both know there are sectarian fissures inside Lebanon. Indeed, there always have been, and the country was deliberately constructed in a way that would allow those sectarian fissures to exist. What's your take on the state of unity of the Lebanese people in the face of these multi-pronged attacks?
Well, let's go first back to the people that he wants to arm. So we all know who carried out the massacre in the Sabra and Shatila camp. But during the 1982 invasion of Lebanon, when the Israeli regime captured Beirut, they allowed these very same militias that Macron is speaking of to go into the Palestinian refugee camp and massacre up to 3,000 people in less than 2 days. So Macron is openly speaking about arming the forces of genocide, which I think is natural. because the United States, the French and the Europeans, the Canadians and the Australians and New Zealand, they're all supporting the genocide in Gaza. Remember, during the first few months when everyone was speaking about a ceasefire, all of these regimes were openly against a ceasefire. And their media and their governments were constantly repeating the lies about burned babies, beheaded babies, raped women, and all that. Why? Because they wanted to give the Israeli regime the space, the justification to carry out this Holocaust, to carry out these massacres. So I think it's fitting for the French president to say that he will fund these genocidal figures who are very close to Western embassies in Lebanon and have been very close to them for many years. It makes a lot of sense. Just as they supported the fascists in Ukraine, just as they supported the Contras in Latin America, just as they supported ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Libya and in Syria and in Afghanistan for many years, and they've destroyed so much of our region as a result of that. So I think it's quite, we should expect such words from Western leaders who are in fact the most barbaric leaders on the planet today. But Lebanon has changed. The people of Lebanon, from what I've seen and from what I've heard, they're much more united today than before. In the past, the West succeeded to divide the people over Syria, but now people are witnessing the Palestinians in the refugee camps, the people, the Sunnis across Lebanon, they see that it is the resistance that is defending the people of Gaza, that is giving martyrs in order to draw away forces of genocide from Gaza, to give space for the resistance to protect their people. So Lebanon is united. It will remain united. These forces of genocide that the French and others mean to support, they cannot do the dirty work of the Israeli regime like they did in 1982.
Do you expect all-out war, Professor, or are we talking incremental increases, attrition, between the two sides, or do you expect a 2006 type effort by Israel?
It doesn't make sense for the Israeli regime to escalate. They've lost in Gaza. They couldn't take Gaza, which is a dot on the map. After almost 9 months, they failed. All they've been able to do is to massacre tens of thousands of people, and the numbers are far greater than the official numbers that we see today. They're far greater. But many are under the rubble. Many have died due to disease and due to malnutrition and starvation. So the people who've died directly and indirectly as a result of this genocide, the numbers are really much higher. But the Israeli regime has failed against Gaza. Does anyone think that they're going to beat Hezbollah? Does anyone believe that when Yemen, which survived a decade of genocidal war, where the Saudis and the Emiratis and the Canadians and the Americans and the Europeans all ganged up to starve Yemen and to destroy the country, that Yemen has defeated the Americans in the Red Sea. For months now, the Yemenis have enforced a blockade on Israeli ports to force them to end the Holocaust. And the Americans and the British are fighting Yemen to help the Israelis continue with this genocide. But the Americans have failed. So when the Israelis have failed in Gaza and the Americans have failed against Yemen, the most impoverished and battered country in the world, perhaps, how do the Americans or the Europeans think that they're going to be able to witness an Israeli victory over Lebanon?
Finally, Professor, there was, we've become weirdly familiar with the style of these ISIS attacks. A priest has had his throat slit on his altar. There are scores of hostages being held right now in a Christian church in Dagestan. There's fighting going on all over the city. The Russian army is now deployed. The police took a terrible toll at the hands of these fanatics But I wonder if they really are fanatics. They're not wearing Western uniforms, but they might as well wear them. Am I right?
Isn't it strange that all of these ISIS attacks, almost all of them, take place in countries like Syria and Iraq and Iran and Russia? Isn't it strange that they don't take place in Israel, or nothing really happens in Europe and the United States, despite all these refugees coming in and being unaccounted for? Why is it that all these attacks, why is it all these outrages take place in countries that happen to have a problem with Western policies? Why is it that both the synagogue and churches, Orthodox churches in Russia are being attacked? Why would they do this at a time when a genocide is taking place in Gaza and the Russians are opposing the policies of the Israeli regime with regards to the Palestinian people? This doesn't make sense, but of course, it really does make sense.
Sadly, yes. Professor Mohammed Marandi, as always, a tour de horizon. In 15 minutes, the world summed up most brilliantly. Thanks for joining us. Will Joe Biden be replaced by Kamala Harris, Hillary Clinton, or Gavin Newsom? Or you may have one or two other options up your sleeve, or you know what I'm saying. 23,820 people have voted. You've got about half an hour to get your vote in. Let me take a quick break, then it's your show, your calls, all the way to the end. Some of us are old enough to have opposed first time around the idea that our young people denied a job, denied education that they can afford, will instead be sent out to pick up the trash. Compulsory, sent out to pick up the trash. We won't have it. We won't stand for it. I'll agitate here on the mother of all talk shows against it, and as the leader of the Workers' Party of Britain, I say no. Our workers demand dignity, demand decent wages, demand employment protection. We will not allow jobs to be diluted. We will not allow jobs to be spoiled by free labor, compulsory labor. We call that slavery, you see.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Well, ISIS seem to be running amok in many different towns and villages in the Dagestan area of the Russian Federation, although they're now taking a bloody good hiding. Thank God for that. Let's go to Canada and talk to Karim. Karim, welcome. What would you like to say?
Hi, George. Thank you for giving me the chance to talk. I just wanted to, first of all, thank you so much for your show. I love your honesty and truth. And I definitely support many of your thoughts around the world. Anyway, I wanted to ask you, since we do see definitely some shift in the UK's public opinion, and I think, like many others like me, thinking that you definitely will have a chance to be part of a coalition party, maybe in the upcoming elections. So I just wanted to have your chat, listen to you, and see what ideas do you have that you want to put forward for that coalition in the future? Like, what would you like to change immediately? I want to say in the first 100 days. Thank you for that.
Well, of course, the outcome of the British general election will be decided by a grotesquely unfair electoral system. First past the post makes it very, very difficult, unlike on the European mainland, for example, where the Pet Lovers Party gets into the parliament in the Netherlands. It's very difficult to get the 15, 18,000 votes in each constituency that is required, especially when the constituencies are deliberately gerrymandered, as my own was, for example, with the Scotland ward taken out of my constituency. These gerrymandering and rigged elections are very difficult for, if you like, small parties, new parties to break in. But once they do break in, of course, the corollary is that big parties can become small very quickly and small parties can become big very quickly, as you're about to see with the Conservative Party. The natural party of government in Britain may be reduced to fewer than 100 members of parliament and maybe many fewer than 100. Jeremy Corbyn, my colleague for 40 years, and I are both predicted by the polls to hold our seats. He as an independent and me as the leader of the Workers' Party of Britain. We have a real chance to win seats in Oldham East next door to me, in Ashton-under-Lyne next door to me, in Bury next door to me, in Inner Manchester, in Central London, in Ealing Southall, and across the East London corridor. We have the possibility of winning dozens of seats. Will certainly materially affect the outcome of scores of seats. But a hung parliament is currently, on the current polls, unlikely. But let me accept your hypothetical challenge and say that a hung parliament is produced with no party with the numbers to form a government on its own, and that negotiations have to be held with smaller parties and individual independents. Our first price would be that the British government ends immediately its participation in the genocide in Gaza. It ends all arms sales. It kicks the Israeli embassy out of London. It stops all transfers of components, military components to Israel, and it ends its policy of giving cover to the regime of Netanyahu in the United Nations and at other international fora. I suspect our second demand would be for 1 million council houses to be built. We have a situation where millions of our children are growing up in cold and damp and dangerous and overcrowded houses, that is, other than those who don't have a house of any kind at all. A number of homeless people now at a record level, sleeping rough in the streets. And many of those, by the way, ex-servicemen. People talk with pomp and patriotism about our armed services, but they don't, as I have done, had to pick up our brave servicemen off the ground, stricken by spice and other new generation drugs, homeless, just released from prison, with no homes, with no jobs, left in total human dereliction. And they are amongst those that are actually homeless. For those families that are living in the damp, cold, overcrowded, dangerous houses, we need a mass house building program of 1 million council homes. And I'm not talking about Mickey Mouse housing associations. I never believed in housing associations. I opposed them back in the 1970s and oppose them now, 50 years later. They are merely a disguised means of privatizing public housing paid for by the public, the debt still carried by the public, but given to housing associations, which are no kind of association at all. They are not elected, they cannot be removed, their policies cannot be affected at an annual general meeting or by public demand. No, they are effectively private companies paying their executives exorbitant wages and salaries, giving out their contracts to their cronies and buddies. And so we favour a system of housing tenure where the public get to elect their landlord and can unelect them at the next election if they are unhappy with the service they are being given. The third would be to take advantage of Brexit, one of the reasons why I supported it, to have a policy of buy British, build British. No public body in Britain, no hospital, no railway, no police force, no fire service, no public service at all should be buying from manufacturers and suppliers of services overseas until it has been proven that we ourselves are in no position to produce the goods, to deliver the service, which in most cases we are more than capable of doing. So when I see British police forces driving around in German cars and French cars, when we could have our own motor manufacturing capacity revived at home, I shudder at that possibility. We have now, thanks to Brexit, the right to favour British goods and services, and we should do so. We also have the right to protect and sustain our own national industries. Let me give you just one example. I'm talking now, it's almost past, I need to move on, but let me say one example is the British steel industry. What kind of a country has no steel industry? Under the European Union, we were not allowed to subsidize our own steel industry. We had to buy steel from the cheapest source, and cheapest cheap, as they say. We were the premier manufacturer of steel in my own lifetime, and we need to get back to that now, and we have the power to do it. So any government that promises to implement these policies and more, I commend our manifesto to you, will be able to talk to me as the leader about our support on a care and maintenance basis of a minority government. We will not go into coalition with anyone. We will ally with anyone at all, Nigel Farage or anyone at all, for good, but we will ally with none for ill. None. Nobody can count on our support for doing something bad, either to our own people or to any others around the world. Kareem, thanks for the chance to air that. 24,653 people have voted, and at this moment in time, Gavin Newsom seems to be the favourite. You'll all have to Google who he after the show. Tracy Smith Pomeranian on the poll says, I don't care. As an American, I am boycotting the three-ring freak show. Harsh words indeed. I commend Dr. Jill Stein of the American Green Party to you. Two cheeks of the same face, vote third party. Your candidate won't be elected, but you'll at least make a statement, says Rais, 1953. And 23B67Z9L, I hear Juan Guaido is still available. He's a student now in Florida, and yet we gave him billions in gold bullion as the official president of the United States. I hope he's not got it tucked away in his student residence. A left-wing nationalist says, I think Jon Stewart is their best chance. One, he's not a politician. Two, he's not responsible for anything that is currently happening. Well, it's interesting that Jon Stewart made a comedy meme some years ago, I think 10 years ago, which was liked by the Labour candidate for the Chingford and Woodford constituency. She liked it 10 years ago, a post from a Jewish American comedian, and that got her axed at the last minute by Keir Starmer as the official Labour candidate in that constituency at the general election. But the last laugh is she looks like she's going to win, defeating the former leader of the Conservative Party, Ian Duncan Smith, and the official Labour candidate. Now, I seem to have frozen again, so let me take a break. I'll be right back. Stay tuned.
George, I'm just looking at another dimension in this Gaza war conflict. Could this be a religious conflict in the guise of it's not Islam versus Christianity versus Judaism, but an ideology, a Zionist ideology, in establishing their leader that is supposed to come in the future, and they will then govern and rule?
It's in their ideology, for sure. The Zionists are no more and no less than a nationalist ideology. They are nothing whatsoever to do with religion. Anybody who thinks Netanyahu is religious hasn't looked too closely into his private life. These people are extreme nationalists, exceptionalists. Some Americans believe in American exceptionalism. Zionists believe in Jewish exceptionalism. Nobody, in truth, is exceptional. There's nothing religious about it. It's about land. It's about nationalist supremacy, ethno-religious supremacy on the land of Palestine. And the Europeans colonized Palestine in the same way that the Europeans colonized South Africa. So fitting, the victims of white European colonialism are coming to the aid of other victims of white European colonialism. And they're doing the whole world a signal service.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Let's go to California. That's where Rishi Sunak is headed on the 5th of July. Let's talk to Dave, who wants to tell us who Gavin Newsom is. Go ahead, Dave. Welcome.
How you doing, George?
Oh, good. We've never heard of Gavin Newsom. Educate us.
Gavin Newsom is Nancy Pelosi's nephew. He survived.
Do I need to know more than that?
He survived 2 recalls here in California, barely, and they were rigged. He should have been recalled twice. The guy.
So why is he the favorite? Why is he the favorite to replace Genocide Joe? I mean, it doesn't seem to make sense that a guy who's not even popular in his own state is the best the Democrats can come up with in the national poll.
Thank you. And this is how they're going to do it. What they're going to do is they're going to wait and wait and wait before they present him. So there's not enough time to research him to knock him off.
Yeah, but it's cutting it fine now, Dave. I mean, what happens if it seems likely that Joe Biden's trousers fall down at the presidential debate next week, either literally or metaphorically?
He will fall down. Don't worry about that. He's not going to make it.
Yeah.
No, he's not going to. And he's got so many negatives now. Even the Dems don't like him anymore. Yeah, he lost almost all
okay,
the black
thanks, Dave, in California for that. Got to go to England, in Leicester, where Davinder is on the line. Go ahead, Davinder.
Hi, George. Pleasure to speak to you. I'm not really prepared. I wasn't expecting the call back. But my first question is, how tall are you?
5'8".
Right. Yeah, I'm not much taller. I always just feel really uneasy because I'm not the tallest of people, although I love you and follow you. I always feel that you're height phobic for some reason, because you're always mentioning height in a lot of your comments. But at least I know how tall you are. You're not.
Forgive me.
I think
it's my age and class.
Yeah, it's just, I follow you, and then when I try and show you videos, once you start mentioning height, I kind of cower down because I feel, a bit picked against. But anyway, I had a few points. One of the points was conspiracy theory or not, but like we've got elections going on all over the place. European Championship. The media don't concentrate on what's going on in the world to us, the main, the public. I follow you and I listen to a lot of other people, and it's like a ticking time bomb. I try and tell my family how close we are to a nuclear war, and I'm just thinking, is this all these elections, everybody announcing on, Rishi Sunak all of a sudden announcing it when he didn't have to? Is this a cover for them to actually generate war? And these are really like zigzag thingies. Two, my father passed away in October, and I remember giving him updates about what was happening in Gaza and whatever, and this and that. And he turned around to me and he just, he's been through a lot. He's 90 years old, and he just shook his head. He didn't want to hear. And he said to me, "You don't know what's coming." He goes, "You don't know how cruel this world is going to be yet." And he's seen a lot. He left home when he was 15, 16 with an 8-year-old brother. And it's just, I feel that I put one of the comments, I said we maybe need to have a look at, like, say, the Indian farmers' protest, where, for over a year and a half, they blocked motorways, their equivalent of motorways, and they were fed. And I think that our peaceful marches, our everything, we need to do something radical before, we may bring a city to standstill, but it's better than bring the city to standstill with war or a nuclear war.
Well, I tell you what, let's do something radical on the 4th of July, Devinder. Then we might not need to block anything for anybody. Let's all radically decide that we're not going to vote for either cheek of the same backside. That would be a bold and radical step. If we can win that argument, we can change our country. If we can ensure that nobody votes Labour or Conservative, we will have made a revolutionary change in British politics. And some may say that's too big a task. Well, if it's too big a task, blocking motorways isn't going to unblock it. If we cannot persuade people not to vote for two genocide parties, both of whom have failed the country time after time on issue after issue, both of whom have reduced our country to its current sad state of affairs, if we cannot persuade enough people not to vote for them, but to vote for somebody, anybody else, then no farmer-style protest is going to cut it, in my view. You get the government in the end that you vote for. At least you get the MP in the end that you vote for. Chris 1 says Gavin Newsom would be the Democrats' best choice. He's attractive, young, articulate, a fresh face, and completely compliant to the corrupt establishment. And Paul Meany says, hopefully PiersMorgan will not dare to repeatedly, rudely interrupt you after Morgan provided 9 months of cover for the brutal ongoing genocide and Holocaust of the Palestinians. He should be in Nuremberg. Maybe he'll wish he was in Nuremberg rather than facing me in the debate that is coming up. Our legend, Simon in Florida, nowadays with weaponized news, is on the line. Let's hear from him. Simon, what's rattling?
Greetings to you, Mr. Galloway, and to your worldwide audience. You will be unsurprised to hear that I have some truly momentous information to share with you and all the folks around the globe who are listening in so attentively to your show. In the last couple of days, we have had President Putin of Russia and the new Russian defense minister and the seasoned Russian foreign minister at an event inside the Kremlin in St. George's Hall, ironically, and then at a press conference in Kazakhstan, explain categorically what the long-term goal for Russia and China is, and via a hidden hyperlink in the transcript of the press conference that Mr. Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, provided, actually gave access to a document that explained that this deal had been agreed with President Xi on May the 8th, 2015, when they agreed to merge President Putin's plan for a greater Eurasian partnership with President Xi's plans for the Belt and Road Initiative. They give the document name and the precise date. Now, President Putin said, and I'm just going to read one paragraph from each of them. He said, President Putin speaking here, and to be clear, we're not putting out Russian propaganda. I haven't agreed this with you in advance. We're not advocating for one view or another, simply sharing information. And obviously your audience around the world will draw their own conclusions. But President Putin said, last week, this is him speaking on Friday, referencing back to a statement that he had made on the 14th of June, I outlined our vision of work to create equal and indivisible security in Eurasia. We are ready for a wide international discussion of these key, vital issues, both with our colleagues in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Commonwealth of Independent States, the Eurasian Economic Union, BRICS, and other international associations. Mr. Lavrov went on to detail those as being the Gulf Cooperation Council and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. So this gives you an idea of the scope of this plan, half the world, basically. He said, we will even include European and NATO states. Then on his first big outing as the new Russian defense minister, Mr. Bulusov said, now our country is at the forefront of the struggle for the establishment of a just and equitable world order. The collective West seeks to restrain its development, break the independent political course, and jeopardize the security of the state. Now, to put these in context, in their speeches, half was about the Greater Eurasian Partnership, which is the official Russian name for this scheme. The Russian initials are BEP. I'm using the acronym GEP. And I'm just today finishing editing a 90-minute documentary that will be available, going into the historical documents that have been provided by this hidden hyperlink on a subpage of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs that linked to a report that was prepared on the 15th of June 2023, showing all the steps they had taken with Iran, India, Pakistan, and China over the last 9 years. But whilst all of the Western media had possibly understandably been focusing on how these gentlemen had made half their speeches about the Great Eurasian Partnership and half of them about Ukraine, possibly the saddest comment came from a young graduate of the Russian Military Academy who at this presentation that was honoring their equivalent of the top graduates from Sandhurst or West Point and Hendon, the police college, this young man who may be in combat in weeks, and whether you take their side or not, you can feel his emotions here. He said, we are aware today that our professionalism is in demand more than ever. The life of our soldiers, the fate of our children, and the future of Russia depend on the decisions we make.
Wow. Very big stuff. I look forward to that documentary. WeaponizedNews.com. Simon, our legend in Florida. Thank you very much indeed, as always. Sean Corrigan says, hi, George. I watched your excellent Killing Kelly film the other day. A fine film. Keep up the good work. Thank you, Sean. You get it free, by the way, if you support me on Patreon. Patreon.com/George Galloway. We really depend on what comes in there to keep the mother of all talk shows and our broadcasting work on the road. So please, if you can spare it, go to patreon.com/George Galloway. Apart from anything else, you'll get that film, Killing Kelly, and the killings of Tony Blair, absolutely free of charge. Let me go to my good wife, who wouldn't, Gayatri. What's rattling, Gayatri?
I just want to say
Yes.
how much I enjoyed the interview with Donald Carter and his footage from Pyongyang during the official state visit by Russia with Vladimir Putin meeting KimJongUn. And if our audience also enjoyed it, I can tell you that Donald Carter will join us again tomorrow with Have It Out with Galloway. So if you want to ask Donald questions, you can go to the website and ask him.
That's a great idea. They could ask questions about North Korea, about which people know so little and would like to know far more. I'm lucky that I've been there, and I've promised to take you there and our dear friend Imtiaz. We're going to go to North Korea over the holidays so that we can see something that is quite unique. I'm not a supporter, by the way, of the North Korean political system, and I don't approve of hierarchical rule, although some people in Britain are quite happy for hierarchical rule, hereditary rule in Britain, but ridicule it in North Korea. But I'm against it in North Korea and in Britain. It's just a silly way of doing things, and I'm definitely not trying to bring North Korea's political system here in Britain. But I am in favor of seeing how other people live. I am in favor of understanding other people's point of view, and so are you, and that's why we'll be off to Pyongyang over the summer. Go ahead.
Exactly. I've been to Seoul before, where K-pop is very big, so I'm curious to find out how K-pop is playing there. Anyway, moving on to the terrorist
It's a better class of K-pop, I'll tell you.
I believe so. So the terrorist attacks in Russia are still ongoing, and I just wanted to phrase this tweet from Candace Owens. Suddenly, a bunch of terrorist attacks in Russia at the moment that Western elites decide that they want war with them. Looking forward to see what the investigation yields. Pray for the innocent Russian civilians. Candace Owens is so on point nowadays, and she has been for quite a while. This is why I'm a big follower of her, and I am a bit of a fan. This is Tony, who emailed in saying, "Hi, George. World War III is already underway, but the sheep don't know it yet. When the draft papers hit the doormat, many people in America will rise up. Ditto in the UK. Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, they're all prepared for the worst. But is Western Europe and North America? I don't think so. I don't think so."
Well, I'll tell you one thing, as you know, I'm only 45, but I'm told that in the Great Draft Rebellion in the United States against the Vietnam War, Bill Clinton, of course, deftly avoided being drafted for the Vietnam War. Joe Biden avoided the draft 5 times, but that hasn't dulled his appetite for war. But at least in that great era of the late 60s, early 70s, when people were rising up against the draft, the media reported it. But I'm going to predict to you that we're about to enter an era where the media will report nothing that the state does not want reported. That is the state we're in. Go ahead, Gayatri. Time for more.
Yeah, you say that, but you and I have both noticed that when we do turn on terrestrial TV, every ad break, we now see one for joining the army. Isn't that the case in the UK?
Everyone.
Where they subliminally try to send a message on how cool it is to join the army, what benefits there are to joining the army. And in this respect, there's an email from Mary saying, "Mr. Galloway, I was alarmed to hear your statement to the effect that when Keir Starmer takes office, there will be war within 6 months. Is it possible you can enlarge the statement?" This is obviously from the manifesto that the war was
well, I'm not in any doubt. Anything I've said in this electoral cycle, of that I am most certain. But before I explain why, you reminded me of a great Billy Connolly sketch, which should actually come back into vogue in the light of all these army recruitment ads that are now in every commercial break on British television. It's quite an advertising budget. Billy said, travel the world, see exotic and interesting places, meet interesting people and kill them. That is the direction of travel. Keir Starmer is the most obvious plant of the globalist front and its deep state bowels that has ever come to power in Britain. Tony Blair had some independent thinking, but Starmer is a robot programmed by the United States deep state, the CIA, the MI6, the WEF. He is your globalist's globalist. He will take Britain into war because a scorpion stings, because it's a scorpion. Starmer, as a dullard Blairite, will be even more keen to show that he's more Blairite than Blair, more royal than the king. Trust me, within 6 months, if Keir Starmer gets a big majority in this general election, Britain will be at war. They'll be at war either in the Gulf, or in the Red Sea, or in the Levant, or in China, or more likely in Eastern Europe, in the Ukraine confrontation between NATO and Russia. Mark my words. Go ahead, Gayatri, one last one.
Yeah, okay. If you have one more time for one more, I wanted to read this one from Kevin in Greece, who is following our show avidly. He says, "Dear Mr. Galloway, I am a little worried, or at least concerned, by your upcoming bout in Manila, or was it the jungle, with Piers the Mouth Morgan. I would urge you to take all measures to ensure that the referee is not from the British or American media. I would suggest that you check his gloves yourself for horseshoes or hidden nuts and bolts, and possibly his boots for any concealed weaponry. And do not take your eyes off him and never turn your back on him. In a fair contest, I would expect a complete victory for you, George the Garrett, with 2 falls, 3 submissions, followed by a knockout. I am looking forward to this bout very, very much. God bless you and your loved ones. We are all blessed to have you fighting in our corner."
How kind. Thank you very much. As you know, I'm a southpaw. I'm very awkward to fight against. Southpaw like Rocky. You remember on the ice when he explained to his then girlfriend, Adrian, what a southpaw is? You'll see a southpaw in action between me and PiersMorgan this week, God willing. Thank you. Gayatri, I'll take you for chips after the show. I better squeeze in some more calls. Federico is in London. What would you like to say, Federico?
That's a fantastic jacket you're wearing. That joke by Billy Connolly first appeared in a film called Full Metal Jacket. As far as BRICS is concerned, I did an add up of the 11 countries which are the main member of the BRICS. Between them, they have 3.7 billion population. If we add up the population of Anglo-Saxon countries and Europe, we come to about 900 million. So 3.7 billion versus 900 million. And there are 13 countries who have applied to join BRICS. And between them, they would have 90% of the world's oil reserves.
We should join the BRICS. If I was going further down my list of negotiating points for anybody that needs my vote to form a government in the next parliament, Britain becoming an applicant to join BRICS would be one of them. Leave NATO, join BRICS. We'd be joining the bulk of the world's population. If we joined the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, we'd not only be joining more than half the world, we'd be joining more than half the world's wealth, and we'd be the only Western country to do so, and we would get most favored nation status our ancient ways and learning would be useful to these BRICS. Our red brick universities could become the go-to for BRICS countries. I could go on. It's the BRICS that is the future. It is the SCO that is the future. Federico, thanks. Sorry, we're racing towards an end. Paul Meany says it's a great loss for the Brits not to have the beautiful Gayatri standing as a candidate in a British election against the genocide Holocaust enablers of the Palestinians' appalling suffering. Well, I need to persuade her to have a British passport first before she could stand. But I'm working on it. Last call, I think, is Sam in Montreal with news of a Canadian doppelganger. I'm all ears, Sam. Who?
Oh, thank you for having me on. First time getting through. I wanted to ask first if you know or have met Sid Ryan. He is your political doppelganger. We are in desperate need of a workers' party and independent grouping party in Canada where we have two cheeks of the same backside with a third cheek attached on one of them. It's a horrific experience. Yes, that's Sid Ryan. And the
a horrific
question,
posterior. What does he? Give me his name again and tell me which party he is.
He used to be in the NDP. He had a very similar trajectory to yours. He stood for election several times. They kept him from running for the NDP party leadership. NDP is supposed to be our supposed Labour Party. They are not. And he's very staunchly anti-apartheid, anti-Zionist, and that's the reason why they've largely kept him from running. And the second question I had very quickly.
Well, we better get him on as a guest, don't you think?
I hope you do. Encourage him to form a third part. Well, I guess a fourth party.
Fourth party, yeah.
He's very well respected here. And I've even though I've never had a chance to vote for him personally because I was never in his riding, I'm well aware of him. Others are very well aware of him. He'd be a great leader for a movement like yours in Canada.
Well, that is a very welcome piece of information. I don't think he's my doppelganger facially. Maybe if we put a hat on him, let's see if that improves his polling. But I'm very interested in linking up with people who think like us all over the world. And when I say think like us, I mean socialist, not liberal. I ain't no liberal, bruv. So if your idea of socialism is NATO, is the EU, is 97 genders, is ramming sex education that the parents don't want down the throats of children, what's the one that they've got in Rochdale coming up? Junior Pride, Youth Pride, age 10 to 18, including drag shows, paid for by the taxpayer, voted through by a Labour council, most of whose councillors are Muslims. If that's your idea of left, count me out. Count me out if you are obsessed by identity politics. Count me out if you're always looking for ways to divide people rather than to unite them. Count me out unless you think that the maximum identity is the identity of your relationship to the means of production, your identity to the relationship of ownership and wealth. The vast majority of people, more than 90, more than 95%, are united by the fact that if they didn't get to work this month and they didn't get paid this month, or maybe 1 month after that, they would be in penury. They would be the homeless people on the streets. They'd be people one medical emergency away from poverty, a redundancy, a major health event which was deleterious to the ability to work. That's the most important identity, you know. And if you start to think about it, you'll see that most of us are in that place. We live by selling our work, by selling our labor. If no one buys our labor, or for that matter, if they dramatically cut the price of our labor, if they decide they no longer want to employ our labor and they want to go to Timbuktu and set up a factory and employ the labor there at a tiny fraction of the cost, we are up the creek without a paddle. We have been delivered into penury, poverty, and with net zero in 2030, we'll be bloody freezing cold too. Luckily, it's not freezing cold right now, at least in Rochdale, and the sun is still up. So I'm going to take my good wife to the lake for some chips. I hope that you'll join me tomorrow night for Have It Out with Galloway, with Donald Courter, reporting from his trip to Pyongyang and to Vietnam. And you can appear on the video wall and be seen as well as heard. See you Wednesday for the mother of all talk shows. Good night.